Shane Carruth.
It's like the real deal here.
So I know of one person who I think has seen this a third time tonight, and he told me that he loves to come and watch it and let it wash all over him, let the film just wash all over him. And I know other people who have seen it and have many, many questions and are trying to figure things out.
Sure.
How do you see it? I mean, do you have a preference how people should see it, that they should ask all these questions, or that they should let it wash over them? Or is either fine with you?
Wow. Yeah, my hope is that in one viewing that there's an emotional experience that takes place, and that for the most part that there's a narrative that people understand, if the meaning is potentially veiled. It's interesting because it's, you know, the first time anybody saw this really was in January, and then it's been seen in a few different places since then. And so this, in my mind, a conversation was started and is now evolved a bit. And I mean, I think it's going relatively well. The reason I bring that up is because, you know, there's some early reviews, and it has a different ambition. It has a different way of existing, really. And I think that's necessarily going to be divisive in some way, because some people are going to key into what it's doing immediately, and maybe they don't like it, maybe they do, but they're judging it according to what its intent is. And then there's other people that, for whatever reason, if I haven't prepared them properly, or who knows, that aren't going to have something that's trying to satisfy their expectations, and that's not going to be a great situation. So anyways, so some of the reviews, I believe, you know, they wouldn't know necessarily what to say, but maybe these weren't the most positive reviews, and they would say something like it's opaque or it's obscure, and then they would go on and they would list the plot out, you know, sort of beat by beat, and do a really wonderful job of synopsizing it. And at the end of it, you know, I was struggling to wonder, well, what was so opaque?
So opaque about it.
And you know, maybe I'm wrong on this, but what I think is that it's obviously telegraphing meaning. And so if the meaning is not summed up, or if it's not well known by the end of the film, I believe maybe that's where the word opaque or obscure is coming from. But to be honest, that's not something that I find to be a problem. I am hopeful that it is compelling enough to be thought about after the credits roll, or maybe revisited, and I'm confident that it's worth doing, and it's singular enough to tear apart. And I think some of the reaction has hopefully proven that, or proven that it's possible anyways.
No, and I think you're right. One of the things is that there are, I mean, this is the second time I've seen it, and I find more possibilities in it, more answers, more questions, which I think is the main pleasures of the film.
I mean, that's what I enjoy. I mean, that's the thing, is like, at the end of the day, this is there's a lot of stuff going on, and it's trying to do a lot of things, but essentially it's trying to be a film that I would enjoy. I mean, not really. I'm not that so full of myself, but really that's the only metric that I can try to satisfy, is something that I would respond to.
When you did start writing this, and there are many. There's one story, but many other stories. Things fall in on each other. And did you have this sort of, let's just call it like a complex process? That's what I would just call it right now, from the beginning, or did you start with a simpler idea, and as you were writing, did more things come to you? How did the script evolve?
I mean, it started from a place that had nothing to do with any of the weird aspects in the film. I mean, I was playing with personal narrative and what happens, where that comes from, how big it is, what it encompasses, and I guess early on I wanted to have some characters that I would take that away from them, and they would have to rebuild their worldview or how they thought the world viewed them, all of their beliefs and their place and their morality and ethics and how their relationships worked and how they thought of themselves, and all this stuff would have to be stripped away, and they would rebuild it based on potentially the wrong information. Waking up in a moment. Each of these, our central characters, have woken up at some point and looked around and had to figure out why they would have done the things that it looked like they did, and then they have to have some answer to this and then embrace that version of themselves. And so that's where it started. And then I guess there were two other things that happened after that. One, I had to build the sort of mechanics of the plot that would get them there. Yeah. And that needed to satisfy a criteria in my head of being embedded in the environment and in nature and in the place that we live, and to believe that this is something that is cyclical and could potentially have been around as long as any of us have been around, because anything else would have meant that it was introduced by something outside, something foreign, and then that means that it's essentially about foreign things, when in order for this to be universal, it needs to be something that's, in my mind, it always has to be here. So that's one thing. That's that led to sort of the weird life cycle. And then the other thing is just this nonverbal thing, this thing of feeling like you're being pushed around by events outside yourself, and trying to trying to be aware of that or suspicious of that without being able to really talk about it in any kind of intelligent way. That needed to be where these people were. They needed to constantly be living out a fictitious version of things, and we needed to be able to see that in a way that they can't see it, and they needed to be affected by things off screen. So anyways, all of that dictated why it would be this way.
And it's interesting, you could talk about it, people, the characters may lose their narrative, and I remember I was watching it, at one point I was thinking it's sort of like dancing around reality, but then I said, no, it's actually almost like, to me, it's like kind of dancing around narrative, what you normally would see as narrative, because it doesn't necessarily follow all the rules. But one rule I see you did follow, there was a gun at the beginning, and it got used at one point, so.
I'm no fool.
Hey.
Who knows? A lot, well, two things. One, because so much of what we're talking about is in the natural world and about soil and worms, and there's just a tactility to it that my mind goes to, and that's paired with, there's so many shots of hands in this film, because almost essentially every character is unaware of the events around them, whether it's our two central characters or whether it's even the characters that are involved with the life cycle. None of them, they're all performing these little tricks in nature without necessarily knowing about or caring about what's coming before or after them. They're just a cog in the machine. This idea of hands searching and fingertips touching surfaces is, and that being the only thing you could know about where you are or where the edges of things are, that suggested to me some, that the visual language needed to say something about tactility, and so I guess, that's where my mind went, is that we're talking about understanding, being able to see slivers of things and almost nothing else beyond them. And I could probably, continue talking along those lines, but that's more or less it. The only thing that really mattered for me with that, being able to show that, was I wanted Chris to have a job that was sort of already built in the world of fiction and narrative. And I had these effects tests for this weird-looking film, and thought that I could put those in there, and then I would, with those images, it would suggest that, great, that's what she does for a living. It's just something like that. Yeah. Do you mean the way the film's executed, or the substance of the subtext of the film? Oh yeah, well, no, absolutely. Well, in a way, here's what I would say to that is, yeah, look, this is sort of just a general sense of it, but the first third is mainly putting Chris through this process. We're being introduced to the mechanics of this world, and she's being processed through it. So it's almost all of it is about control, and so we have lockdown shots. Some of our longer edits or longer held shots are in that sequence. And it's more or less as straightforward as this film is ever likely to get. And then the middle third is a much different thing. It's you know, the way Chris and Jeff are reacting and dealing with a set of circumstances that we know that they've been through, but they don't know. And so everything about that is much more subjective. The camera work gets much more subjective. The music is relaying characters' mind states instead of you know, any kind of other plot-driven information. Yeah, I mean, because they're being affected at a distance in a way that they can't speak to. So all tools are being used, all the cinema tools are being used to hopefully convey that subjective experience. So I hope that's what you're sort of talking about, because that's definitely the intent of the middle third. That's the best question I've ever heard. Like for anything. Did you see this as reverse alien abduction? You know, I might be lying if I said that. Yeah, no, I didn't think. I mean, I'm trying to find a way to think.
But
about
I think
that.
you should write something on that.
Really.
Yeah, seriously. No, seriously. I mean, you know, we all get different things from this.
It starts with being really, really naive, and then it being about necessity and just pushing forward. No, I really would like to do a better job of raising money and getting better tools, because you know, it's really wonderful to have the film be completed, and I couldn't be more proud of it. But you know, it was a nightmare for everybody involved, really. I mean, it's not fun, and it's a lot of work. And the bottom line is, what I know is that when you make a film, you pay for it. You pay whatever it costs, and you're either going to pay that in cash or you're going to pay that in like sleepless nights and sweat and stress and relationships that get frayed because of all the stress. It's not the way that I want things to go. It's just the way that they went this time. Yeah.
Unfortunately, they seem to have worked, right? I think he wants to work with you next time.
It's definitely not a reaction to Primer or anything. I mean, you know, Primer existed that way purposefully, and this didn't need that. That's not what this was trying to satisfy. But it's also not the opposite either. It's not saying, oh, because the last one had so much talking, we're not going to do any this time. I really just viewed it as a completely independent thing. It's weird because I really, like now with some perspective, it's like, oh yeah, these two projects must be connected in some way. And sometimes I'm being shown that they are and what's common about them, but I was not thinking in those terms at all. I just, when, you know, I guess I sort of talked about how the story came to be. The bottom line is it was a fun thought experiment for a while, and then when I realized what I was stripping away from these characters was so encompassing or all-encompassing that it reached a point where it became really horrific and emotional for me to think about, and then that led to an idea of this romantic promise that existed when you've got a couple characters that are in that low place. Once that became clear in my head that would be the story, nothing else mattered in the world. There's nothing else I could have ever done but try to get the film made and get it to completion. And I wasn't really thinking about it wasn't a reaction to Primer. It wasn't, you know, I had this project I was trying to get made, and I obviously didn't get it made, and I failed. But this isn't a reaction to that. It's not. It was just I had to. I was just consumed by this, and it just needed to happen no matter what.
When you worked with your cast on the script, I mean, how clear was the script? Was there a lot of improvisation? Did they have input, or did you have very clear ideas and lines of the few that you had for everybody?
Yeah, I mean, there's very little improvisation in it. I would say, I mean, most of it is locked down and verbatim to the script. I can point to maybe only one place where things got a little different, and that was the shared memories bit, where by that time it became clear that we were changing cinematic modes for every layer that Chris was getting pushed through. And I was talking a little bit about the first section being a bit more locked down, then we get into the subjective mode, and it almost becomes found footage or like verite or whatever, and then the last third is something else entirely that I don't necessarily know how to talk about, but it definitely changes narrative modes to match this lack of a world and this nothing but subtext being on the screen sort of situation. But the shared memories thing was something where it just became clear that, yeah, I've got this story that I want us to repeat over and over again. I want us to be stepping on each other's memories, but if I had scripted that, it wouldn't have been any better than what we shot. And it just became clear that, great, we know what the story is. We know that we've got to have this, we've got to have it go from something light and fanciful to something really agitating and a little bit annoying and frustrating. And so let's go to our locations and pick which one seems most appropriate for that and just figure it out by that. Because to have done it mechanically and script it out precisely would have at best been the same thing, and at worst maybe not been so believable, I guess, or effective. So that's one thing. Yeah, I mean, everything was storyboarded. I mean, it winds up being chicken scratch on the back of the script page, and I'll draw my little boxes and show everybody, exactly the sequence of shots that we're doing. Basically, everything gets a plan A, and then we show up, or and sometimes I've been there before, sometimes I haven't been able to be there, and sometimes it goes okay, and we can stick to it, and sometimes there's no way to put the camera in a place that would get us this shot. So suddenly the entire thing unravels. And the bottom line is, once the language was established, there's something that happened, and I know everybody sort of knows this, but for some reason I had to figure it out on my own or whatever. And it's something I'm trying to embrace now, which is just I and the filmmaker, the other filmmaking team, we have to have what we're doing so well internalized that we can go in and make choices that are seemingly improvisational, but informed by thematically what we're trying to accomplish. And I used to be very skeptical about that because it's very easy to fake your way through that, I think. And I'm trying to become more and more open to it because I think it's a real thing, and I think it really happened. And I think in the same way that a band that learns a piece of music well enough that can go and do, a 4-minute departure down an avenue, but still stay true to the bit of music, that's what I think has to happen with filmmaking. And so, I'm less and less able to talk about these concrete building blocks of writing. Okay, now writing's done. Now we do pre-production. Okay, that's done. We do production, then we do post. All of these things, the music, the visual language, the writing, the performance, all of it, production design, all of it has to have a conversation and keep having a conversation until the final decisions are made, so that they're all being informed by this sort of network storm of activity. Anyways, I've departed from what you asked, I think, but it was storyboarded and then changed when needed. Yeah. I mean, there were a few reasons to pick it, and so maybe I'll just say that the biggest one was the fact that I keep talking about how everybody is disconnected from the next thing in the chain, or our central characters are being affected by things that are off screen. They're all receiving something that they can't really know about, and in my mind, that's something that is. This is so horrible. This is like the part of the movie. This is the part of the movie where you say the title, and then everybody knows what the title means. But they're all being affected by something that is seemingly coming from upstream. That is something that you would have to really venture out to find out about or speak to. And you know, in a way, when Chris has her break at the end, her psychic break for the loss of her kids, and I know, right? is certain that she's found the culprit for all of the things that have put her in this state, and goes after him. This is not why it's called Upstream, but I always thought of that as this is Heart of Darkness. This is this ancient idea of going upstream or going upriver to get that thing that's causing the problems, and potentially maybe that's the wrong thing. And in this story, I think that's meant to be up for debate. So I mean that's more or less why those words are the title.
Do you have? And I didn't think that was banal. I wondered that myself. So
Titles are so horrible, though,
well,
aren't they? I mean,
it could have had other titles, but
no, I know. But that's the thing is, like, if it's like, what do you do if it's meaningful, then it's pretentious, and if it's not, then it's pretentious. It's like no matter what you do, it's nothing better than a place mark. So
his third film is going to be called Pretentious Movie, and then just leave it at that.
Yeah.
But you mentioned Heart of Darkness, and of course Walden is throughout. And I'm wondering, well, first of all, if Walden, if the book, I want to go out and read it again now, has been with you from the start of the concept of this, and also if there are other literary references, film references in the making of the film. At one point, the first time they were in the hotel, when you didn't see anybody, of course, I'm thinking of The Shining. And just because they were showing Room 237 tomorrow night, I guess, and it's in everybody's mind. But I was thinking, all of a sudden, I was getting these little, riffs off other films. So I don't know. Do you have a lot of other, films that you were thinking of that you might have been referencing at some point or other, or literature or things like that? And you don't have to say exactly what they were if it was, but just are these things in your head?
No, I don't ever knowingly reference another work. I mean, I know. I mean, I'd be naive to think that. I mean, I'm informed by the same things that everybody else is, and so I mean, if I have a corridor shot, I'm sure I'm stealing from every corridor shot that I've ever seen. So I mean, that's all in there. As far as Walden itself, I tripped into something weird with Walden, because all I really wanted was, once I had this plot that's set in the natural world, and I've got to force this character to write and rewrite a book of some kind. So what is this book? That's almost, and it needed to be something that suggested peacefulness and something that wouldn't wake somebody up when they're under the state of suggestion or open to suggestion. That's why I picked it. I don't understand why it became so appropriate. And when I started looking through it, and I'm seeing all of this language of the sun is but a morning star, and a halo over my shoulder, and even the colors that were picked in the film to we start from a place of this blue substance, and this so blue was our suggestion of control, and so every occurrence of me and Tom Walker, the production designer, spent way too much time worrying about this stuff, knowing, because we were going from blue to yellow at the end, and yellow was going to be our somehow the cycle is broken, or there is an awakening of some kind. We were going to go to the yellow orchid. That was the vision that she would have, and there were other things as well. But that was a known thing from the get-go, from the script stage. And then suddenly to find a sentence in Walden that says blue mixed with prevailing yellow of the sand, it's like, I don't know what that is. Why is that in there? And then everything else. And then when it became clear that she would be repeating these lines from Walden, and that's all that she was ever gonna. She was gonna be repeating back what she'd been imprinted with, and without any more information than that. Then I go looking in Walden for these lines, and there's, for want of food and also sleep, which she had been without under that situation, and just it became much more and more appropriate. It talks about sound and the way that sound works underwater, and those sequences already existed. So I don't know. I hadn't read it since high school, so I don't know if I somehow stole it and didn't know it, or I'm the luckiest guy in the world. But once we had that, we played that up.
That's very Twilight Zone-y.
finding Amy Simons to play Chris, I didn't know her at all or what she had done. I've never actually seen another movie that she's been in to this date. I keep meaning to, but at the time I was just given her name and sort of doing my diligence to investigate what are the possibilities for this integral character. And she was in Florida. I called her up. She was in Florida editing her film that she wrote and directed called Sun Don't Shine, which is actually coming out in a few weeks. And I didn't know what that meant, that an actress was editing a film. That doesn't make any sense to me. And I didn't know what that. I thought she was maybe sitting behind an editor and watching that happen. I don't know. And then she said she offered to let me see it, and I still was very skeptical. I thought it was going to be this, some interesting, weird experimental short thing that was whatever. I don't know what I thought. And then I saw it and got 10 minutes in and was sort of just completely blown away by. Not only was it a great film, but it was a really great film. I think I pretty much knew that, I think I'd seen her act maybe for a couple minutes on YouTube, and that paired with how well she got narrative just meant, well, if this can happen, this needs to happen. And so I asked her to come into town, and she did, and that was one of the easiest gifts that this film got. And everybody else in the film is cast out of Dallas, pretty much with traditional a casting director, a woman called Keena Bale that works there, and luckily enough, Andrew Sensnig, who plays the sampler, the pig farmer, he was the first person who tried out. I mean, maybe like the next morning after I had described to Keena what I needed, I suddenly had this video show up, and it was his test, and it was perfect, and that was an easy thing, and. After a while, the production got a little tiresome, and it was difficult to be scheduling people and trying to meet new people, and then finding out that they don't have the schedule and all this stuff. So it became more of a let's circle the wagons, and just if we can put a family member or a friend in this spot, let's please do that and not worry about this anymore. So there are occurrences of that. I mean, Meredith Burke, who's one of the co-producers, winds up being the orchid daughter at the end, and that's my mom, who's the orchid mother. So they're pretty good there. And I don't know, more or less, that's it. Once production technically started, it was a few months. It was maybe a bit longer than a few months, but it's weird because I was, some of the microscopic stuff was shot while I was writing. I knew that I needed that, and I wanted to make sure I could get it in a way that I thought worked. So I would do a lot of experimenting with. Those wound up being kids' toys that you go and you put these little dots in water and they balloon up into little shapes or spheres full of water, and if you time-lapse photograph them over the course of an hour, then they do that, and I would mix them with sand and all sorts of other stuff until I got something I wanted. But that was early on, and then Casey and I we would go jump on a train, and so some of the footage that we were testing out the camera with winds up being shots that are actually in the film, and then even after the editing process, there were shots that I wasn't necessarily happy with, so me and my brother would just go out and grab them, and this is like a month, after technically we were supposed to be done with post. So it's like it started off small, then it got really bigger, and then it tapered out. But it seemed like a while. That was going on.
I love to hear those kinds of effects with kids things, because that was to me it just seemed so realistic. I knew it wasn't, but I love how to hear how these things happen. It looks so creepy, of all the stuff that's inside your little fingers. And I'm glad you heard him, because I didn't hear him. This was just fabulous talking to you. I think it was primer in 2004.
Yeah.
So it was 9 years. I think it was well worth the wait, and I bet you most people here will agree, if not everybody, that it was worth the wait. Shane, thank you so much.
Of course, yeah, thank you.
And we thank all of you.